It's about trust, and we'll be talking about trust in just a moment. Trust as a newfangled kind of concept to attach itself to technology. When you look at things like Airbnb, when you look at things like Uber, so much of it is based on trust. But where is your trust? Is your trust in the character of the driver who picks you up, in the person who gives you the place to stay, or is it in the technology that organises you all to be in the one marketplace to barter the money for the service at the time you both need it and have it to exchange? It's an interesting conversation. Trust, how it exists in the new economy. Is it the same as it was in the olden days? Has it changed? Do we need to look at it again and raise it to the top of our list of qualities we value in the society in which we all share? Good morning. Every Sunday morning, you and I like to delve into different aspects of a relationship, and we don't like to be too heavy-handed about it because, let's face it, life is flawed. The human condition is not perfect. However, more and more with this age of technology, we are resorting back to what truly makes us happy in life, what gives us contentment, and that is being in meaningful, purposeful relationships with other people. Rachel Botsman is a woman who has explored this in her life's work, although she's a young woman.
Not that young.
Young enough to still want, old enough to know better. And Rachel's thesis point, for want of a better phrase, is on trust. She's given a TED talk about it. She lectures globally on the subject, and she joins you this morning in a very special conversation on ABC Radio Victoria. Good morning to you, Rachel.
Good morning.
Interesting that trust would become a topic of contention, conversation, when once upon a time it was intrinsic to the laws of friendship and relationship.
Yeah, I'm sure that it didn't have a word. It just was something that was very innate to us, that we just kind of saw it like a social glue that enabled us to cooperate and collaborate and have relationships with people, because the trust was so local, it was so face-to-face, it was so personal and direct. And I think that changed when we moved to cities, we went through the Industrial Revolution, we started to invent things like corporate brands and intermediaries like real estate agents and lawyers, and trust stopped flowing directly between people and through these institutions. So, yeah, it's a very funny word because it's a word we use a lot, but then when you ask people to say, well, what is it and what does it mean, it's actually quite hard to define.
How did you get involved in this area? Lecturing on trust, giving a TED talk on trust. It's taken you around the world. It's like people think, oh, this is a new concept.
Yeah, no, it's very strange. So weirdly, not weirdly, I was working with the Clintons for 3-4 years in New York. So I came out of Harvard and thought I wanted to be academia, but then realized I wanted some hard real world experience. And
so you worked with Hillary and Bill?
No, I worked with Bill. But it was when Hillary was running during the first campaign. So it was a really interesting time because here you have this very established brand. The Clintons are a brand. And then you had this newcomer on the block, Obama, and watching these, this campaign unfold was really interesting. But I was actually at the foundation, and it started out with a fascination of the relationship between power and trust. And then I was doing a lot of work with kids and health, and this was the very early days of when people were starting to use technology to mobilize people. And they were the roots of understanding online trust. And then I had this hunch that something was happening. So I wrote my first book, which was called What's Mine Is Yours, which really was about the so-called sharing economy like Airbnb and Uber. But this was very early. This was 2009. And then through that work, the thread through that work is trust. I mean, these ideas, they really shouldn't work, right? Like, sharing a home with a total stranger or getting in a car with a total stranger. And then a couple of years ago, I thought how interesting this was that trust seems to be imploding in all kinds of institutions, whether it's, religious leaders in the church, the Catholic Church, banks, of course, the media, government. And so we've got this decline of trust on one hand, and then we've got these new forms of trust rising up through technology, trust in robots, trust in cryptocurrencies. And that led to this new body of work around, who is it that we really trust in society, and are we more trusting, or is technology encouraging us to place our trust in the wrong people in the wrong places? And the thing that's really interesting is that when trust breaks down, that's when people want the regulations. That's when people want the institution. And so we kind of want both things, right? We want this decentralized platform where it's really easy to find homes, it's really easy to find rides, and it's really easy to find dates. But yet, what is the role of the platform in all of this? And we're seeing this play out with Facebook right now, right? Are they a media company, or are they just a tech platform that connects users and information? And so the platforms are trying to figure out their role, and the users are trying to figure out their role, and the regulators are trying to figure out their role, and we're kind of in a bit of a mess.
See, I go right back to the Last Supper and the human condition. Because if one takes stories of the Bible as lived experience, told through story over generations and adapted, ultimately what that story tells us is that the closest to you can betray you. And the good ones rise again.
Yeah.
So breach of trust and betrayal are necessarily part of who we are as humans. It's part of who we are.
It is part of
the
who we
ability
are.
to do someone in.
Well, this is the thing that, we can't have perfect systems. I find this so interesting.
But humans aren't systems.
They're not systems, but we expect the system to be perfect. Like, this is the end goal, it's, and humans are messy. They are complicated, and that's what makes us beautiful. And I think it's so interesting. There's, the line that sticks in my head, there's a brilliant trust theorist called Diego Gambetta, and he says, trust has two enemies: bad character and poor information.
Oh,
which I love, because it's actually often not bad character. It's actually the information piece that we don't ask the right kinds of questions to really understand whether this person is trustworthy for this particular thing that I'm asking them to do.
So what sort of questions should you be asking in the personal services sphere?
Well, this is
because that's where you feel most betrayed.
It does. You do, yeah. And I find it so interesting that so the sister of trust is trustworthiness. And this is the geeky part, because there is a science behind what makes someone trustworthy.
Oh, tell.
So you, for example, so there's always four traits. So first is competence. So do you have the skills and the knowledge and the experience to do this interview? Yes. Are you reliable? Are you dependable? And we're pretty good at asking questions around that. That's where we come from. That's our instinct. But it's the why side of things that often goes wrong. So there's two traits. One is integrity, which I think is the holy grail of trust.
Really?
Yeah, I really do. Because that's actually not about whether you're a good person. It's, do your intentions align with mine? And then the last one is benevolence, how much someone cares. And that one also is quite easy to detect. But this integrity piece, and you see this in businesses, right? Like the businesses we get angry at, the institutions where they really let us down, it's often not because of their competence, it's more because of their integrity.
So what is integrity, if you could break it down? Because Oprah Winfrey's got a whole manifestation on intent. Her entire show was built on good intentions. Her curation of subjects, the way she put together her programs and what she involved herself in. She chose with the best of intentions to have a good outcome, and felt that by choosing in that way that she manifested goodwill towards herself.
Yeah. Yeah.
How do you suss out intent?
Oh, no one's ever asked me that question. It's, it's an alchemy of honesty, because someone can state their intentions, but if they're dishonest about them, that's not really, I don't think that's integrity, right? That's actually a lie. It's really getting to the bottom of why someone's doing something, right? And if they're honest about it, this is why it's quite hard to define. If they're honest and open, so if someone says, like a real estate agent, they can have integrity and not be a particularly nice person, right? They can say, my intent is to sell your house very quickly because I'm very busy, and to make a lot of money off this sale. Right. And now they've stated their intentions. They've been open and upfront about it. So I think it's also tied to authenticity. Right. So it's this mixture between honesty and authenticity that you have to really try to get to the bottom of. And it involves often asking a few questions versus that first response.
And yet we buy houses sometimes just having seen them once on instinct? Does it feel okay? And then you do your research.
Yeah. But we do that so many times in life, and that's a wonderful thing. That's the thing. But, you know, I think gut at the end of the day is a very powerful thing when it comes to trust our instinct. But we can tune into the wrong signals. So charm, clothes, character, feeling of respect, light, whatever it is. There's so many signals that voice is a huge one. And that's what I think is interesting about the technology is can it actually make us better and smarter in the way that we judge people, or is it going to introduce more speed and more biases and lead to automated decisions?
So actually, by use of technology, one could have the courage to ask questions that one wouldn't should one be in a personal relationship with someone. It still puts arm's length between you.
It does, and this is the counter argument is that, you know, there's this narrative at the moment that technology is bad, evil. But, you know, the example that comes to mind is I have a cousin. I went to 3 Tinder weddings this year. It's a normal wedding, but they met through Tinder, right? Like that's how it happened. And
that's not meant to happen.
And my dear cousin, he met his wife on Tinder, and they exchanged 80 messages before they even met. And she was, you know, she's a beautiful human being, but she's quite shy. She said she revealed more about herself through that messaging. She knew more about him than any other date that she'd been on. So by the time they actually came together in the bar, they had a pretty authentic conversation because they got through all the, you know, where did you live? Where did you come from? Blah, blah, blah. It doesn't always happen, but it is interesting that in some way it might give people permission to be more authentic.
And less confused by sexual signals in that respect.
Yeah, and all the things that go on, and chemistry. But, you know, saying that you have to get beyond the problem that the way people represent themselves online is the best version of themselves, which some people would say is misrepresentation.
Your guest this Sunday morning is Rachel Botsman. She is an author and speaker about trust. Her latest book is Who Can You Trust? And she joins you in the studio to talk about this most curious of elements. We've nailed it to integrity and authenticity and courage in terms of asking questions. Do you think that the breakdown of religion has led to a lessening of trust? My theory is that religion is first draft of the law. And once we sorted out the legal system, religion became something else. If one looks across all sorts of religions and philosophies across the world, you always have that golden rule in the centre of it, do unto others, whether it be Christianity, Judaism, even within Buddhism and other religions. There is that core tenet of responsibility to another person, and would you like it? Is that trust?
Are you talking about trust in the religion, the faith itself, or in someone with the same faith? That faith gives you a common thread, a common bond.
Yes.
And
a common language.
A common language, a common
framework.
Common rituals.
Yeah.
Yes, so I think it's really interesting because religion is an institution. But when we talk about an institution, we're actually talking about rules and norms and behaviours. So driving on the left side of the road that's an institution. That's something that we accept. So in relation to religion,
and I trust that most people will do that should they be sober, sane, and wishing to be safe. And my overwhelming assumption is that trust will be repaid.
Exactly. And so if we didn't, where I'm going with this, if they didn't, it would be a mess, right? So religion played that role for a very long period of time. It was norms, conventions, rituals, behaviours. And when that's sort of breaking down in society, there's a loss in the fabric of common bonds and things that we can connect. And so this is one of the things that I feel so passionate about in my work is that how do you make technology bring people together and not push them apart? And I think there is this massive, back to the religious point, there is this massive vacuum, not just because of religion, but so many other things that have gone through our lives. I think of my grandparents' lives where, not necessarily a good thing, but trust was very easy for them to understand because it flowed upwards, you know, to their teachers, to experts, to authorities, to rabbis, to
respect.
Yeah, there was respect, and it was
elders.
Yeah, and it was a very top-down fashion. Now that suppressed a lot of voices and put a lot of power, let's be frank, in the hands of old white men. But there was something to be said, and that's what we're seeing. We're seeing this dispersion of trust where people are saying, I trust a stranger, I trust a neighbor, I trust a colleague more than I trust someone in a position of power. And that can be a wonderful thing, but it can also lead to a very dangerous scenario where you have this vacuum where you listen to voices that know how to speak to our feelings versus facts. And that's where you see Brexit, and that's where you see Trump. They are playing this trust game extremely well, whether we like them or not. They understand, the campaigners for Leave and Trump and his team, they understand how to use these mechanisms to really influence people, to speak to their feelings, to speak to their anger and their hate. And that's the precarious piece, because what social networks do is that they amplify our fears and our anger. And it's really hard to let in dissenting views and opinions.
So you would say that one needs to trust facts rather than feelings as well?
Yes, and that's why the gut thing is so hard, where people say, you should listen to your intuition when it comes to trust. You really need your head as well.
To inform your gut.
To inform your gut.
Even though they're made of similar material.
Yeah, and what algorithms often do is they remove that logical, rational process that you actually need, because the machine's doing it for you.
So technology can stop you thinking.
We're in this age, it's like trust on speed. It's like accelerated trust. And, I am guilty. Like every time you click and you swipe and you accept and you share. I mean, I was setting up an account yesterday and I suddenly became conscious of it, because it's like, can I have access to your microphone? Can I have access to your contacts? Can I have access to your Facebook? Can I have access to your Instagram? Like literally within 30 seconds, You're like, okay, I've just given them access to hearing every conversation, access to my camera, access to my geolocation so they know wherever I am in the world. And I've gone through this in such a compressed time frame because I want the benefit of this app. And that's where the technology is so smart, because the people behind it, they're masters in persuasion, they're masters in pulling you through. And this is what goes back to this intentions piece, is I think what we really need is actually transparency of intentions. That's what we really need to be asking for from these technology companies is how do I really understand, when I accept this thing or I use this thing, what are your intentions behind this? I know a lot of people who work in these tech companies, they're not bad people. It's just this is what the technology inherently wants them to do. And you see some leave, like they go through these ethical conundrums. But
how do we fight back?
It's something I've been thinking a lot about. So I don't think the answer, you can't say to people, you shouldn't use this or you shouldn't use that. I don't think that's the case. I do think we need to be asking, particularly in Australia, much tougher questions around data and data regulation. So in Europe, for example, there was mass mobilization against companies' control over our data. And you may have heard GDPR, General Data Protection Ruling, has just gone through. And it's phenomenal what it does for the consumer. You basically can demand from any company what data you have on them. So this woman just asked Tinder, actually, she said, I want all my data. She got an 800-page report back.
Wow.
You can ask for your records to be deleted. You can be asked to be notified anytime that company is monetizing your data, so selling it on to another company. And I think we need to be back in control. But we have to be asking the right questions and be willing to put in the effort to actually take back control of our data.
Rachel, what a great conversation. Thank you for joining us this Sunday morning. Rachel Botsman, author of the book, Who Can You Trust? With a question mark. Ultimately, it's got to be yourself, to look after yourself. You have to trust yourself, don't you?
Yeah, and we should be trusting people. I'm not saying become distrustful. Like, this is society's most precious asset. But we have to think of it like gold. We have to take care of this, because when trust disappears, and we are seeing it dissipate and be eroded, bad things can happen.
Rachel, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
It is a minute to 12 o'clock. Rachel Botsman on the radio with you. Some text messages in response to that interview, which, as I said, I recorded earlier this week. Anita says, one needs to trust and know oneself, and then one will act with integrity and be trustworthy, not hand responsibility to others. Don't we know that? I have zero trust in politicians, especially from the right side. I equally have no trust in the MSM. The ABC only maintains a slight trust these days. I have zero trust in this economic system called neoliberalism. Spiros from Williamstown was giving me a great whack of what he doesn't trust. There's so much conversation on this. I'm so glad I brought you that conversation because it's definitely engaged you as it did me.